There are crimes that seem to erupt without warning. And then there are crimes where, after the tragedy, investigators begin looking backward and discover warning signs that may have been there all along. In Mandan, North Dakota, police are now investigating a case that raises an unbearable question. Could the deaths of two very young children have been prevented? On the evening of August 6, 2026, police officers were dispatched to a home on South Frontier Trail. The call involved 3 children. All of them were younger than 4 years old. And according to investigators, their own mother had locked herself inside the house with them. Her name is Kaylee Earhart. She was 22 years old. By the time officers entered that home, an ordinary family crisis had become something far more devastating. 2 children would not survive. A third would require emergency surgery. And the information investigators would later uncover would suggest that the violence may not have begun with the knife police found inside the house. It may have begun much earlier. According to authorities, police were called to the residence at approximately 5:42 that Thursday evening. Outside the house were 2 frightened family members, the children's father and their grandmother. Police were told that Earhart was still inside with the children and that she had threatened to kill them. What happened next unfolded quickly. Officers approached the residence. According to the probable cause affidavit, they could hear signs of violence coming from inside. They forced their way through the door. What the first officer encountered was immediately alarming. Investigators say Earhart was holding a large kitchen knife against her own throat. There was blood on her clothing and body. She eventually dropped the knife. According to the affidavit, she then told officers to kill her. Police took her into custody without seriously injuring her, but the emergency was far from over. Inside a nearby bedroom, officers discovered 3 small children. They were unresponsive. All 3 had suffered severe injuries to their necks. Emergency crews rushed them for medical treatment, but doctors could not save 2 of them. One was 3 years old. The other was only 5 months old. The third child, a 1-year-old, survived after surgery. For the officers who entered that home, Mandan Police Chief Jason Ziegler later described the scene as something nobody should ever have to witness. But once the immediate emergency ended, another investigation began. Police needed to understand what happened before they arrived, and that is where this case becomes even more disturbing. Investigators interviewed Earhart. According to the affidavit, she agreed to speak with police after being advised of her rights. She reportedly told investigators that she remembered placing the 3 children together inside the home. She also remembered holding the knife when officers arrived, but she reportedly said she could not remember everything that had happened. That statement immediately creates one of the central legal questions surrounding this case. What was Earhart's mental state at the time? But investigators were not relying only on what she could remember. They also interviewed the children's father. His account provided a much longer timeline. According to court documents and local reporting, he told investigators that his relationship with Earhart had been deteriorating. He had been considering divorce. The couple had apparently been discussing separation for months. He also disclosed that he had relationships with other women and that Earhart knew about them. That detail could become important as investigators attempt to understand what emotional pressures existed inside the household. But it does not explain the violence. And investigators will have to be extremely careful not to confuse marital conflict with motive. Millions of relationships collapse without violence. The far more important information involves what Earhart had allegedly been saying before August 6th. According to the father, she had previously made statements about dying by suicide. Even more concerning, he told investigators that she had also made statements about killing the children. Those allegations change the way the case must be examined, because if confirmed, this was not necessarily the first moment anyone feared the children could be in danger. The father reportedly contacted mental health services about the comments. Court documents also indicate that social services became involved. He told investigators that Earhart had previously received mental health treatment and that she had been taking medication. According to his account, authorities were aware of the situation and she had ultimately been allowed to remain around the children. There are still major gaps in the public record. We do not know exactly what mental health professionals were told. We do not know what evaluations were performed. We do not know what risk-level professionals believed existed at the time. And we do not know whether the statements described by the father were documented exactly as he later described them to police. Those distinctions matter. After a tragedy, it is easy to look backward and assume every warning sign should have predicted what happened next. Real-world threat assessments are rarely that simple, but investigators now have to reconstruct that entire history. Who knew what? When did they know it? What exactly was reported? And what actions were taken? There is another element that investigators will almost certainly examine closely: a firearm. According to the father, Earhart had recently purchased a Glock handgun. Investigators reportedly found evidence suggesting the transaction took place only days before the killings. That purchase alone does not establish criminal intent. But placed beside the alleged previous threats, investigators will want to know why the gun was purchased and what Earhart intended to do with it. Then comes one of the most significant pieces of evidence described in the affidavit: the father's cell phone. He told police that during the confrontation on August 6th, he recorded video. According to investigators, the footage appeared to show Earhart holding one of the children while armed with the handgun. At one point, she allegedly told the children's father to say goodbye to his children. That alleged statement could become extremely important, not because it automatically proves what she intended to do minutes later, but because prosecutors may argue that it demonstrates awareness, threat, and possible intent before the children were attacked. The father told police that he managed to wrestle the handgun away from Earhart. He then disassembled it and scattered its pieces around the house. Police later recovered the weapon, but removing the gun did not end the danger. According to the grandmother's statement, Earhart then chased both adults from the residence while armed with a knife. They were forced outside. The door was locked. The children remained inside. Police arrived soon afterward. What happened during those final minutes inside the house will likely become the central focus of the criminal case. Prosecutors will attempt to reconstruct the timeline almost second by second. Phone records could matter. Video timestamps could matter. The location of the firearm pieces could matter. Blood evidence could matter. The position of the children when officers entered could matter. Statements made before and after the incident could matter. And Earhart's medical and mental health history could become one of the most fiercely contested parts of the case. But there is an important distinction that should not be lost. Having a mental health condition does not automatically mean a person is legally insane. Those are completely different questions. Millions of Americans experience serious mental health difficulties and never commit violence. A criminal court must answer something much narrower. Did the defendant understand the nature of her actions? Was she legally responsible under North Dakota law? Was she competent to participate in her defense? And what evidence establishes her state of mind when the children were attacked? Those questions cannot be answered from headlines. They require medical records, expert evaluations, witness testimony, and evidence. At this stage, the public simply does not know enough to diagnose Earhart. What we do know is that authorities say there had been previous concerns. That fact will keep one question hanging over this investigation. Could anything have been done differently? The answer may eventually involve several systems: mental health care, child protection, family intervention, firearm access, and communication between the people who were worried about the children. But investigators will have to establish exactly what each person and agency actually knew before assigning responsibility. There is also the question of the children's father. Online discussions of cases like this often quickly turn toward blame. Why did he leave the children inside? Why did he not remove them earlier? Why did he not recognize the danger? But the affidavit describes an extremely fast-moving, violent confrontation. According to his statement, he physically fought Earhart for control of a gun. He disassembled the weapon. He was allegedly bitten and scratched during that struggle. Then he and the grandmother were reportedly threatened with a knife and forced out of the home. Those claims will need to be corroborated. Fortunately for investigators, they are not dealing only with spoken testimony. The cell phone video may allow detectives to compare the father's account with actual recorded events. Physical injuries documented by officers may provide additional corroboration, and the recovered firearm may help establish the sequence he described. This is what makes modern homicide investigations so different from cases built entirely on eyewitness memories. A person can lie. A person can remember something incorrectly. A person under enormous emotional stress can misunderstand what happened. But digital evidence can often provide another clock. Investigators can examine when videos were created, when messages were sent, when calls were placed, when the weapon was purchased, when emergency services were contacted, And when officers arrived, all of those pieces can be assembled into a timeline. That timeline may ultimately become more important than any single person's version of events. As of the latest publicly available information, Earhart faces 9 criminal charges. They include 2 murder charges, attempted murder, and multiple other allegations connected to the violence inside the home. At her initial court appearance, a judge set cash bond at $3 million. The judge cited the extreme violence alleged in the case and concerns involving the victims and the community. Earhart has not been convicted of these crimes. The accusations remain allegations unless and until prosecutors prove them in court. Her preliminary hearing is currently scheduled for October 6, 2026. That means the investigation occurring now may be crucial. Detectives will likely continue interviewing relatives, friends, and anyone who had meaningful contact with the family. They may seek mental health records through the appropriate legal process. They will examine phones and other digital devices. They will study the firearm transaction. They will analyze physical evidence from the house. And prosecutors will have to decide how all those pieces fit together. One of the most difficult areas will be reconstructing Earhart's mental condition during the weeks and months before the killings. Investigators may ask friends whether her behavior changed. They may examine messages for signs of escalating fear, anger, hopelessness, or threats. They may determine whether medications were prescribed and whether there were concerns about how they were being used. But none of those things should be treated as a diagnosis by the public. There is a difference between investigating mental health history and declaring that mental illness caused a homicide. Only qualified experts with access to the complete medical evidence can begin answering that question. And even if a serious disorder is eventually identified, another legal question remains. What did Earhart understand when the attacks occurred? The alleged video recorded before the killings could become highly significant in that debate. Prosecutors may argue that threatening the children's father while holding a weapon shows deliberate thinking. A defense attorney may argue that behavior captured on video must be understood within a larger psychiatric context. That battle, if it comes, will involve experts rather than speculation. But behind all of those legal arguments are 3 children. 2 of them will never grow older. The third survived an attack that could easily have taken another life. Local reporting indicates the surviving 1-year-old underwent surgery, and the family has received community support as they deal with both medical expenses and funeral costs. For that child, this case will never simply be a criminal file. It will be the beginning of an entirely different life. And for the first responders, the consequences may also continue long after the courtroom proceedings end. Police Chief Jason Ziegler publicly acknowledged the emotional impact of what his officers encountered. That deserves attention. First responders are trained to enter situations from which everyone else is trying to escape. They are expected to control the threat, protect victims, preserve evidence, and make decisions within seconds. But training does not erase what they see. A scene involving injured children can remain with an officer for years. That is one of the unseen consequences surrounding crimes like this. There is the criminal investigation. There is the family. There is the surviving child. There is the community. And there are the people who entered the house before anyone else understood what was waiting inside. The legal process is only beginning. Much of what we currently know comes from police allegations, court documents, and statements made during the earliest stage of the investigation. New evidence could change parts of the story. Witness accounts may be challenged. Medical experts may reach conclusions that are not yet available publicly, and prosecutors and defense attorneys may eventually present very different interpretations of the same events. But one fact cannot change. On August 6th, 3 very young children were inside a home in Mandan, North Dakota. 2 of them never came home from the hospital. 1 survived, and investigators are now trying to understand not only what happened inside that house, but what happened before it. The warnings, the family conflict, the previous concerns, the mental health intervention, the gun purchase, the video, the struggle, and the final minutes behind a locked door. The hardest question may ultimately be larger than whether Kaylee Earhart committed the crimes prosecutors accuse her of. A jury may eventually answer that question. The harder question is whether this tragedy developed in complete darkness, or whether there were signals that something was going terribly wrong before August 6th. If people around this family knew there was a risk, what options did they realistically have? If professionals were previously involved, what did they actually know? And if the danger escalated in the final days, was there a moment when the course of events could still have been changed? Those answers are not available yet. But as investigators continue building the case, they may become just as important as what happened inside that house. Because after 2 children are dead and another barely survives, understanding how the violence happened is only part of the story. The other question is whether anyone had a chance to stop it before it was too late.